Okay, so here we are. We're at Shoreham Airport in the south of England, and we are about to do what is meant to be our first solo. Obviously, not my first solo, but this is what your first solo would be like. So, at this point, you've probably already done 10 to 13 hours worth of lessons with your instructor, and he's happy he signed you off that you're skillful enough to go out and negotiate the circuit safely, come back and do a landing. Sometimes your first solo can be three touch and goes, or two touch and goes at a full stop landing, or maybe just three full stop landings with a taxi back to the start of the runway each time. I think whenever I did mine, I can't really remember now. I think it was just one takeoff and landing, and then you go and get thrown into the swimming pool and all that kind of good stuff. So here we are. We're in our 172. This is what we'll have been flying up to now with our lessons, and this is basically a quick run through of the startup procedures, taxi out, circuit. We'll have a look at how to do a circuit. We'll have a look at all the procedures for doing all that stuff. So here we are. We've jumped into our 172. Oops. We've got our little friend here who's standing with his back to us, doing absolutely nothing. So doors, we've jumped in, shut the doors, put our seatbelt on, all that kind of good stuff. We can assume that we've already completed our external checklist. And so first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that there's fuel for the engine to have. So we've checked our quantity outside, and then the gauge is in here, and we've put the selector to both, and we're going to push the fuel shut-off valve to the open position so it is ready to have fuel. Next thing on our checklist is to check that the circuit breakers are all in, so we'll do that. Just making sure that none of them have popped out for any reason. If they popped out, it could be an indication that something was wrong with that circuit, or it could just be the numpty before us decided that he was going to pull it out for some strange reason. It does happen. So the next thing we need to do is make sure our parking brake is set. So we will set our brakes, click the parking brake on, and that's the brake set. So we've done all that. We make sure our avionics is switched off, and then we're ready basically to start engine. So it's quite quick to get this thing going. So first of all, this should have been out for the previous flight, but throttle control we're going to put to a quarter open, so around there, and we are going to have our mixture at idle cutoff, which it is. We're going to flick our battery on. We're going to see some lights come on. We're going to see the gyros spool up. We're going to hear the noise of the gyros spooling up, and the self-test. There we hear everything kind of spooling up. And this actually won't come on actually till the engine started. So we've turned the batteries on, and we've got our oil pressure, voltage light, and our vac light, and that's telling us that basically we don't have any oil pressure, and we're not charging, so we're discharging the battery. So we've got our master switch on. We're checking our amp readings to make sure that it should be discharging now, so that's right. Anti-collision light going on, and that's just a little beacon at the back of the tail, which lets all our people around us know that we're about to start our engines, or we have the intention of starting our engines. If it was nighttime, we'd also put our nav lights on, but we're not going to do that because it's daytime. Next thing we do is have a good look around, make sure nobody's near us that we could kill with our propeller, and it's a suitable area to start our engine. And so this guy probably wouldn't be standing there in front of us anyway. Next thing we're going to do is actually start the engine. So we're going to flick the key all the way to start, and while we're doing that, we're going to slowly increase the mixture until it catches, and then we're going to push it all the way in. So let's do that. Cranking the engine, advancing the mixture's cut all the way in. You can see now the artificial horizon coming on as the gyro gets powered. And so everything's spun online. Our lights have gone out. We're now checking to make sure we've got oil pressure, which we do. Oil temperature will start increasing itself. The throttle set 1200 RPM. We should have done that quite quickly after we started it. Starter lights are extinguished. Oil pressure we've checked. Back we've checked. Just below the green. Amps charging, well, it's still at 0, so maybe that gauge doesn't work in flight sim. Low volts is on extinguished, and yeah, that's it. So next thing, we will put our avionics master switch on, get all those good things powered up, self-test, these all switched on. So, and our autopilot is doing something strange, probably some sort of self-tech, yeah. And we're going to set the transponder to 7,000 on standby, so that's ready for later. Our ADF is powered up as well, which we don't need today. We're going to make sure our flaps are up, which they are. We're going to set our radios, so we would tune them for departure, tune them for ground, maybe listen in on the ATIS, which we're not going to do today because it wastes too much time. And we're going to set our flight instruments, so we're going to set our altimeter to the local pressure setting. So today it is the standard pressure setting, which is 1013-2992 in the States. And we are checking our artificial horizon is leveled. Our airspeed obviously reads 0. This is wings level, balls in the center, and our direction indicator ties up with our compass, which it does. Vertical speed obviously is 0. These two we're not going to use, but they look good. Come over here, gauges are good. Reading with the same as what we saw in our walk around. These are fine at the minute. Temperature's increasing. Fuel pressure's about right for now. Back is just in the green band, and our amps are good. So next thing is then we're going to turn on our taxi light, and we're going to get ready for taxi. So we'd call up, ask for taxi. They would say taxi to runway 02, I think it is. So one thing we're going to do is we're going to set the heading button to 02. We're going to release our parking brake. So we go idle power, release the brake, put our yoke back on, and now we can turn. We're going to hit this dude with our wing because he shouldn't be standing there, so hopefully we'll knock some sense into him. Maybe actually we missed him just about. And they probably would have pushed the plane that it was facing out. I don't know why they don't just do that instead of leaving these guys there to push us. So we're going to taxi out. There's a few things that we're going to check whenever we're taxiing out. So we're going to check that our brakes, first of all, work. So we're going to close the throttle, and we're going to test the brakes. So brakes checked, both working. Next thing we're going to do is check our rudder has full movement. So we're going to go left, full, right, full. That looks good. Check both ways. That looks good. We're going to go left here. So then while we're in the left turn, we're going to check our gauges and our compasses. So we're going to check that this is decreasing, wings bank left, balls right. And we need to do a right turn somewhere, so we're going to swing out here, and we're going to turn into the power check area, which is where we're going. We're going to just check while we turn right the rest of the gauges. So should be increasing, bank right, balls left. So now we're in the power check area where we can do our engine run up. So one of the things to consider here is what direction the wind's coming from. Today it's calm, so we're just going to kind of point 90 degrees out, but you would turn into the wind, try and give that engine all the cooling that you can. Right, that'll do. Straighten the rudder so the nose wheel is not crooked. Set the parking brake. Right, so now we're going to set 1200 RPM. We're going to do our power check, and then one of the first things we check is the location is good. So we haven't parked in front of any microlights or something that we're going to blow 10 kilometers away, and we're ready to do our engine run up. So the location looks good, the parking brake's set. We're also going to hold on the brakes as a backup just to make sure, just in case our parking brake wouldn't take all of the thrust that we're getting from the engine. So we're going to put 1800 RPM on. That's 16, 17, 18, coming, 18's there. And the whole nose would be bouncing a lot in real life in this. This creates a lot of vibration, so maybe that's something they need to add in. So now we're going to check our engine temperatures. So our T's and P's, temperatures and pressures are good. They're both in the green. And we are going to check our magnetos. So magnetos are here on the engine. And we're going to check first of all that the drop is within 150 RPM, and that the engine restabilizes once we engage it back again. So there's the left magneto. You can see the RPM drop, bring it back up again, RPM increases, so left drop, no stop, right dropped, not stopped, back. So that looks fairly good. Engine stabilized again. Now we're going to check all of our VAC and our amps within limits, and we're going to close the throttle. We're looking for idle at 500 to 600 RPM, probably going to be just above that. So there it is. It is just at what's that? 600 RPM, 650, something like that. Check for no lights, which we don't have. Throttle back up to 1200 RPM. And that's our power check complete. So the next thing's our pre-takeoff checklist. First thing on that is to check that our throttle friction lock is good, which you don't have in Flight Sim, but that's where it is, just there. We're going to set our trim for takeoff. Mixture's rich. Fuel quantity sufficient for flight, which it is. Fuel shut-off valves pushed in. That's in both. Magnetos are in both. Seatbelts, everybody's strapped in. All windows, doors, and closed. Nunc shaders are all extinguished, excuse me. Pitot heat, not applicable today because it's not required. Instruments are all done, checked. Flaps are up for takeoff today because it's a long runway, don't need them. And sorry, there's my phone. And the comms are all set. And now frequencies are set. Transponder we can put on altitude now. Oops, just turned it off. Put it on altitude so that air traffic control can see our altitude. And we're going to do flicker strobes on, and we're going to do a flight control check. So while we were doing this, we would be looking out the window, we'd be looking at the tail, but you can't really move our head in Flight Sim until they bring VR. So we'd go back, forward, full left deflection, full right deflection. So we'd be looking out the window to make sure that they had the correct movements, and we are just checking that the control column is free. So our strobes are on, and we are now ready for takeoff. So let's taxi to the runway, release our brake, and once we get onto the runway, we're going to have a little talk about what we're going to do. So this is runway 02, you can tell by the big red 02, and it's taxiway Bravo, you can tell that by the big B. Not very good taxiing, that's okay. We're going to check on final approach, make sure nobody's coming. We're going to make sure our passengers are all happy, but it's only our first solo, so we're not going to bother. And you're never going to be happy in your first solo, you're always going to be bricking it. So, next thing is line up on the runway. So that's more or less on the center line. And we'll have a quick chat about, what you wouldn't do in real life, you wouldn't do it here obviously. We're going to have a quick chat about what we're going to do. So we are going to do this. So this is the traffic pattern. So what we're expecting to do basically is to take off on runway 02, not 09. We're going to take off on 02, and then we're going to climb straight ahead to 300 feet on the runway heading. Once we're at 300 feet, we've got enough altitude, it's safe to turn. We're going to make a left turn, 90 degrees off the runway direction, and we're going to continue our climb up to 1,000 feet above ground level. So it's going to be 1,000 feet today, because our field elevation is pretty much at 1,000 feet. So once we're at 1,000 feet, and we're happy that we've got sufficient distance from the runway, once we've got sufficient distance from the runway, we're going to make the left turn on the downwind leg. That'll probably be about the same time that we reach our 1,000 feet altitude, so we'll have to level out. We're going to speed up to our cruise speed of 100 knots. We're going to go downwind at 100 knots, and then once we get to around about 45 degrees from the runway, so we'll check that through our back window, so we'll have a look out there. Whenever we're about 45 degrees from the runway, so it should be somewhere here I guess, then we'll bring our throttle back to 1500 RPM, we'll slow down to 80 knots, we'll deploy our first stage of flaps, and we'll start a gentle descent as we turn left onto our base leg. So while we're on our base leg, we're managing our descent and our speed, we're re-trimmed for 80 knots, and then we're going to keep the plane coming down. We're going to adjust the rate of descent to what we need to do to keep on the glide slope, and then whenever we turn finals, we're going to put in our our second stage of flaps, and whenever we get closer to the runway, we're going to then put in our last stage of flaps, and we'll do about 60 knots, aiming to touching down at just under 60 knots, so about 55 knots. So that's basically what we're going to do very, very quickly, but let's actually go and do it, and maybe you'll see a little bit more then. One thing to note is that the PAPI at Shoreham are really aligned really far down the runway in Flight Sim, so I'll probably end up having maybe 4 reds on it because I'll be aiming more for the numbers here. So that's just one thing to note later on. So let's go. So release the parking brake. Full power. Using the rudder pedals and the heels of my feet to keep it straight on the center line. And then about 50 knots we're going to start to rotate. So airspeed's alive, temperatures and pressures are in the green. Pitching back. So we're off the ground, we're going to accelerate to 70 knots and we're going to trim for 70 knots. So we're going to climb away 70 knots, tracking on the runway heading. There's 300 feet, so we're going to make that left turn. So we would check left, except we can't because we don't have VR yet. About 15 to 20 degrees bank. Continue that climb up. We're going to level out there, that's 90 degrees off. So we're now on our crosswind leg. We're still climbing up. We're maintaining roughly 70 knots, very roughly. And very shortly we're going to have to reach 1,000 feet, so we're going to push the nose down and accelerate. So we've reached 1,000 feet, going to push the nose down. I'm going to let it accelerate and I'm also going to turn downwind because I'm far enough out from the runway now. So, gonna bring it back to cruise power setting now. So we're 1,000 feet, we're just over 100 knots. We're on the runway heading, or sorry, the reciprocal of the runway heading. So we're now on downwind. So you should see the runway at our left hand side. There it is, we're quite far out actually, so we might edge a little bit in, but that's good. Being far out means that we've got plenty of altitude or plenty of distance to lose our altitude. If we were too tight, we would struggle to lose our altitude, so that's good. So that all looks great. Smidgen below 1,000 feet, so just correct that. And I should have turned my landing light on earlier for taking off, but we'll not worry about that. So we would have done our after takeoff checklist as well now, but we'll not worry too much about that. It's basically just checking temperatures and pressures and making sure that the mixture is still rich and whatever. So now we're in the cruise. Now we're coming up to about 45 degrees off the runway, so I'm actually going to start the turn now. I'm going to bring the power back to 1500. I'm going to start the turn about 15 to 20 degrees bank again. I'm going to reduce the speed until we hit 80 knots, which we're there, and I'm going to put the first stage of flaps down. We're going to retrim for 80 knots. We're looking for our base leg now, so it's 90 degrees off again, the final runway heading, and you can see we're a little bit slow now, so I'm going to push the nose forward, gain that airspeed back again. And we've just dipped inside our 90 degrees, so I'm going to correct that. So there's the runway off our left hand side. We're actually pretty good, 2 reds, 2 white, but we're going to probably dip below that, but we're going to turn finals now. And we're a little bit slow, but I'm going to add a little bit of power. So there we are, 1 white and 3 reds. So the more reds, the lower you are. So if you had 2 right, 2 reds, you'd be bang on the approach path. And we're a little bit low at the minute, but that's grand because we're going to put down the last stage, the second stage of flaps. We're going to slow to 70 knots. So now that we've got the height to do that, and I'm probably going to dip below the glide slope shortly, so I'm going to aim for the numbers opposed to the poppy. So retrimming for 70 knots. We're trying to keep that point that we're aiming for in our window in the same place in our window. Very hard to do in flight sim, but whenever there's VR, it'll make it a bit easier. And so we're maintaining 70 knots. We're 4 reds or now, which are kind of a brief they expect to be. We're going to put in the last stage of flaps because we would definitely make the tarmac. So full flaps now, reducing to 60 knots. And now we're just going to close the power, keep the nose up and let it touch the ground. There it goes. Let the nose wheel touch and just dab the brakes really gently. So let's just turn off at the end of the runway, and we'll turn off to the left, and we'll assume that this would be our final parking position, just for to make the video a bit quicker so everybody's not watching me taxi around. So let's taxi off here. Right, so we'll assume that we just parked, set our brake. We would have done our after landing checklist, so we would have brought our flaps up. We would turn our taxi light, our landing light, and our strobes off. What else is on it? Heat would have gone off. Transponder can go to standby now because we're back on the ground. And that's it. So now we would set 1200 RPM because we've stopped. We've set our parking brake. We set the RPM. We'd make sure our taxi light was off. And we check for our mag drop again. So we're making sure these magnetos are still clean after our flight. So we go left, dropped, not stopped. Climbed up again. Right, dropped, not stopped. That's good. So our magnetos are fine. The next thing is to turn the electrical equipment off. So, oops, sorry, wrong button, wrong lever even. So turn the avionics off so that the engine alternator going offline doesn't damage any of the electrics. And then we're going to pull this mixture control to cut off. The propeller is going to stop. We get our note shaded lights again, warning lights. Turn the magnetos off. Oops, wrong way. Turn the magnetos off. Turn our anti-collision beacon off. And the next thing we do is turn our master switch off. So that's our shutdown. First solo complete. We're off to the bar for a beer. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you've enjoyed it, please hit the subscribe button, and if you've any comments, as always, or any questions, please put it in the comments. And likewise, if you'd like to see any other tutorials, let me know and I'll put them up.